Thank you, Joachim, and thank you, everybody. This is the last stretch, the last marathon today with 6 speakers. Joachim's instructions is to keep to the time and the total of 15 minutes, including the questions. So you can cut down on your part if you want questions, or we rush through questions accordingly. But this should be very interesting because still we're looking at very interesting practical insights from the crisis and the crisis management that we are seeing. So our first speaker is Shikandra Kurdi, and research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in the case of Yemen. Please.
Okay, thanks very much. Just wait for the slides to come up here. Wonderful. Okay, so I'll try to move a bit quickly because I really would appreciate responses and questions at the end. So the case of Yemen, let's go ahead. I think I have control of the slides. Here we go. So Yemen, by some accounts, people say it's the largest humanitarian crisis currently occurring. If we look at the latest IPC report, the entire country is in phase 3 or 4, with many governorates in phase 3+, meaning they would be in phase 4 if not for humanitarian food distribution. And the humanitarian food distribution program is really vast. Approximately half of all Yemeni households receive some form of food aid. So that's half of a population of approximately 33 million people. So how did we get here? Part of it is that Yemen was a poor country even prior to the ongoing conflict. If we look back in the past few decades, there was a fairly weak central government governing through tribal alliances. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, had a very low human development index rank, very low for education, very high for population growth, and very high rates of stunting and acute malnutrition for children. This is a recent development. If you go back in ancient history, Yemen was a very prosperous, fertile area. It was the kingdom of Saba, the queen of Sheba, but in recent history, it has struggled a lot. So then when you come up to 2011, there was Arab Spring uprising and transitional government. But then since 2015, there's been an internal war fueled both by political tensions internally and very much also by external regional actors engaging in this local power struggle. So we've got one country, but basically two governments for the past 8 years. The north is controlled by the Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement, otherwise known as the de facto authorities, and the south is controlled by the internationally recognized government. And so then the conflict has some direct effects and indirects on food security. There was an international blockade, which completely prevented food from getting into the country. And you have internal displacement, transport constraints, infrastructure destruction, security fears, etc. Something that's also going on, not uniquely to Yemen, but in other conflict-affected states, is it's been very difficult for humanitarian actors to operate, especially in the area controlled by the de facto authorities in the north, and non-payment of government salaries in the north. So something that is a little bit unique about Yemen, and I think it's interesting for looking at other countries in similar situations, is that beyond the conflict itself, one of the big drivers of food insecurity has been there was a very high rate of reliance on food imports, even before the conflict. And what it means now is that households are trying to buy food that's imported internationally, and there's very high inflation in food prices. That's driven, first of all, by global trends. We all know about what's going on in Ukraine and world food prices. We also see there's been very rapid depreciation of the local currency due to the government kind of printing too many locally issued banknotes. That's especially in the south. So the figure here is showing the parallel exchange rate, or the true market exchange rate, that's just gone way up, especially in South Yemen. And then also beyond kind of the price of food itself, you have the price to import it. So food is coming into the country through the two major international ports, Aden and Hodeidah. And you have also high transport prices due to artificially high local fuel prices from government restrictions and tariffs. So all of that's contributing to the food prices being very high for households. And this is really driving food insecurity because households almost entirely depend on imported wheat for their diet. Wheat and wheat products is 71% of calories for staple for poor households. And they're spending a large share of their total household income just on trying to get those calories. So when we had, especially here in the last year or so, the global food price rise, that put pressure on household budgets. It also put pressure on humanitarian agency budgets. We saw the World Food Program had to cut rations by about half in 2022 due to funding constraints. So I want to turn a little bit towards kind of lessons learned and more solutions oriented. And I think the major theme that I would organize all of these around is that Yemen is a protracted crisis. It looks like an emergency at the beginning of the civil war, but after 8 years, the short-term kind of emergency situation is no longer the only thing that matters. Once you get into this protracted crisis situation, you really have to start thinking, and this is a theme that's come up a lot of times today, but I want to just really make it explicit. You have to start thinking about long-term elements of food security, and I've highlighted a few here. One is the nutrition side, making sure that young children have adequate nutrients, not just adequate calories. Another is supporting markets and the private sector. The third is supporting local governance, and the fourth, supporting local food production. So in terms of kind of specifics and evidence that we have on the nutrition side, I think one of the things that we have really good evidence on in Yemen is the benefits of cash transfers for supporting nutrition. So there's a very broad food distribution system, but that focuses mostly on staple food items, prioritizing getting households enough calories. Cash distribution, by contrast, is less costly and dramatically so. The figure here is showing estimates about the overhead rate for cash distribution, which is all between 16 and 17% by different organizations, versus in-kind food distribution, which is very costly in terms of transportation and distribution costs. We had, even before the current conflict, some research done in Yemen that was comparing cash to food baskets. It was already suggesting that you get much better dietary diversity as measured by the food consumption score by giving households cash rather than the food basket. And then we also saw that the existing system of cash transfers in Yemen, called the Social Welfare Fund, was really effective at supporting good nutrition outcomes in children. And this is, again, evidence from a little bit before the most recent war started in 2015. Quite uniquely, I think we have also some evidence during the conflict itself. We have an RCT impact evaluation that we organized between 2015 and 2017, looking at the impact of the Cash for Nutrition intervention. This was at the time a pilot intervention. It's now been rolled out across the entire country. It's one of the largest cash transfer programs in Yemen. It combines a monthly cash transfer plus a nutritional education session for mothers of children under 2 years old. What we found in the RCT impact evaluation was that cash allowed households to increase consumption of non-staple foods. So that's really key. You saw that between 2015 and 2017, all households were dramatically increasing their consumption of staple calories from wheat, because even though the price is going up, it's the cheapest source of calories there is. So by giving them cash, you're allowing them not to only be consuming wheat, but also some other fruits, vegetables, and especially animal source proteins like milk and eggs, which is so critical for the young children. We also saw that the nutritional education sessions that are linked with this cash distribution were really effective in getting better breastfeeding and water treatment practices. So we had early initiation of breastfeeding and exclusive breastfeeding up to 6 months, both improved. And as a result, we actually got very significantly improved child dietary diversity. The figure here is showing what happened if you look at the baseline, which is the bottom row. Both the control group and the treatment group had an average of 3 food groups per day, which is below the minimal acceptable diet. But then it got even worse in 2017. We went all the way down to about less than 2 food groups in the control group, much better in the treatment group. And really significantly, we actually found that that increased the height for age Z-scores in the poorest households in the program. Okay, so I want to, just realizing I need to move a bit more quickly. So the second set of evidence I wanted to talk about is the importance of local institutions. So theoretically, we know that it's important to build up local governance. You don't want to have just international NGOs coming in and completely taking over. What's been very successful, I think, in Yemen is that there was a few national organizations that have been preserved through the transition to kind of heavy reliance on international donor assistance, because everything is being funneled through a few of these existing organizations, the Social Fund for Development, the Public Works Project, the Social Welfare Fund that I mentioned earlier had this pre-existing cash transfer system. It's now a conduit for international emergency humanitarian aid. And that's very important because it's going to build the basis eventually for post-conflict, hopefully more of a stable social protection system. And it builds that idea that there is still a functioning governance system in Yemen. We were able to actually do some research on that, looking at participants in one of these development programs led by the Social Fund for Development, comparing kind of before they participated to after they participated. You see pretty significant increases in self-reported trust in institutions like local government, government officials, as well as in people who are outside of their close circle. So there's kind of the same trust that there always was in their family, but previously there's much lower trust in people who are from other areas of the governorate or other areas of Yemen. And that's where we actually see some significant changes after people have participated in this national institution-led development program. We also collected lab in the field games that confirm that self-reported trust, increased trust in people from other areas of Yemen. So I think this is a really interesting kind of set of results that's talking about how this theory that national institutions are important for building kind of a trust or an idea of national governance, we can measure that to some extent. Okay, so another key theme I wanted to talk about is that the private sector matters a lot for households. So this is one of the benefits, for example, of doing cash transfers rather than only doing humanitarian food distribution. Something that has come up in our research is that small traders and shopkeepers have a very important role in local communities, not just selling the food, but actually selling the food fairly generously on credit to people that they have a relationship with. And that means that, in a sense, they're acting as a broker for informal insurance within the community. If you have a negative shock, you know that you can go to your local shopkeeper and he's going to be fairly patient with you, letting you buy on credit. Now, it does mean that he's charging everybody in the community slightly higher prices, but because people trust that the shopkeeper is going to be patient with them if they need it, they're willing to pay those higher prices, both for their own kind of future benefit and for the benefit of people in the community. So I think that's kind of an under-regarded role of private sector actors is that they do kind of help people to cushion shocks, and they do play this important role in household food security. So there's been some success, I think, in that in Yemen, but there's still challenges. Some of the big ones are related to the macroeconomic conditions that we mentioned earlier, destroyed infrastructure, and especially international finance restrictions. So that's something that we haven't really touched on a lot today, but it's kind of a international policy regarding the banking perceptions that people have been worried that the banks would not be friendly to sending transfers. Even we as an organization have a lot of difficulty sending money into Yemen. And that's very much related to political choices that have been made. And then finally, sorry, I'll wrap up. I think I failed to go quickly enough, is in terms of supporting local food production. That one we have a little bit less solid evidence on how well it's working. Some of the things that are being tried are solar-powered irrigation is very popular, rainwater harvesting. One thing that we have a bit of a warning on is that we have looked at evidence from a pilot graduation program that was relatively unsuccessful. So I think it's worth also highlighting that as much as we say that we need to support smallholders, in countries in conflict, new production activities can actually be a bit risk increasing for households. And this is something that we kind of are more in progress on and evaluating on the movement towards school feeding programs, and we have an in progress evaluation of value chains and geo-bundling between agriculture and cash interventions. I'll wrap up. Sorry, thanks.